Hello, and thank you for joining today's Diverse Talk Live. My name is Sidney Reese, and I will be your host today. All participants are in listen-only mode. After the conversation, we will have an audience question and answer session. Please type your questions in the Q&A panel at the bottom of your screen. For technical assistance, please also use that Q&A feature to reach me. We are recording today's session and will send out a link of the replay to all registrants. Also, please join us tomorrow from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for the virtual 2020 Arthur Ashe Jr. Sports Scholars Award Ceremony. Go to diverseeducation.com for viewing instructions. And now it's my pleasure to turn the program over to Dr. Jamal Watson, Editor-at-Large at Diverse Issues in Higher Education. Jamal?
Thank you, Sine, and welcome to College Athletics after COVID-19. What is the impact? What are the ramifications? When will college sports return? And if so, which ones? There's been some discussion in the media about the possibility of slashing certain sports programs to safeguard others, such as football and basketball. What are the budgetary issues being explored in the wake of COVID-19? How do we keep our athletes safe? We have an outstanding panel to engage with us over the next hour to address some of these issues from their unique vantage point in higher education. I invite you to join the conversation. Send us your questions and we will get to as many of them as possible over the next hour. And feel free to tweet about the panel at Diverse Issues. Please join me in welcoming our outstanding panel, Dr. Ketra L. Armstrong, Associate Dean for Graduate Affairs, Professor of Sports Management, and NCAA Faculty Representative at the University of Michigan. We have Dr. Eric Barron, who's the President of Penn State University. We have Mr. Sean T. Frazier, who's the Associate Vice President and Director of Athletics at Northern Illinois University. And finally, we have Ms. Jackie McWilliams, who's the Commissioner of the Central Intercollegiate Athletic Association. So welcome to you all. So I want to get to the first question, and I'm sure it's a question that many people have on their mind, and that is, do you all envision collegiate sports taking place in the fall? And if so, what might that look like? I want to start off with you, Mr. Frazier, and maybe we can work our way around.
Well, first off, Jamal, thank you so much for having me. I'm humbled for the platform and on-opportunity. And the quick answer is that yes, I think there's going to be some type of modified process. I am in the camp where if we do not have on-campus instruction, we should not have competition. I think the safety component of that is quite significant. I think it's very important for us to observe health and safety as job one, and then everything else falls in. You know, we are a part of the university. We're not a separate entity. We need to observe that, and we have a pretty robust back to play, back to competition, back to instruction model, spearheaded by our governor and our leader, Lisa Freeman, who again are in constant conversations about what's best for our students. So I think that we will see some type of mixed use. There's some labs, there's some other things that will happen that will necessitate that we have students on campus. And then while that gradual transition, observing obviously health and safety is job one, we can then take a look at if it's safe enough to have both our staff, students, faculty, and quite frankly, community to engage in activity on our campus.
Thank you. Commissioner McWilliams?
Yeah, I think I'm in agreement with Sean. I think the challenge that we have, particularly working in HBCU space, is in highly populated Black communities. Obviously we all want athletics to happen again. I think the bigger thing is, can we bring our students back, our faculty back, the workers at our institution, and create a space for them to be safe? And right now, without a vaccine, there's a lot of unknowns. But the bigger question is the how. If we do, how can we do it? And how does it make sense for the safety of all of our students and everybody who works in our communities, and even more so for our student athletes that have a lot of contact through sports?
Yeah. President Barron?
Well, so I agree with much of what has been said. The key is making sure that the students and the staff are safe. And I do think that we can accomplish that. And I think we're putting in place a lot of mechanisms to make sure that that is the case. And then what will it look like? I think some of the biggest concerns are what does it mean to have a large gathering of fans? And can we make sure they're safe? So I suspect that is the more challenging issue in terms of how things might proceed. I think there may be some shifts in calendar that's possible, but I sort of view it as when, not if.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Dr. Armstrong.
Yeah, I echo the sentiments that have already been expressed. I mean, I know that the term student athlete, that moniker student, is often challenged, but they are students first. And I think any decision has to be anchored into what's in the best interest for our students. And, for our student athletes, we want them to have the optimal learning experience. And if the environment on campus is not conducive for our students to learn, I find it hard to think that it can be an environment that's okay for our student athletes to play sports. So it has to be anchored under the umbrella of what's in the best interest of the students.
Dr. Armstrong, you are the NCAA faculty representative, and I'm wondering, what message are you communicating or in touch with your students regarding issues around safety and the return to campus? What are those conversations like? Because I imagine around the country, others are also having those conversations.
Yeah, I think one of the first things that, I try to do with many of our student athletes is just to remind them, of the character that brought them to the university. So first of all, our students are resilient. And so during this time, it's important to remind them of the resilience that they have exhibited in sport competition throughout. And so, we also tell them that it's important, for them to be patient. And it's really difficult, for a very active community to not have that outlet. And so what we spend a lot of time doing is talking about their mental health and well-being. And I think the other part, it's almost like a unintended consequence. So for so many of our students, their identity has been tied to their athletic participation. And so this has required them to sort of reimagine, something else that's important to them. And so during this time when they haven't had a chance to be involved in sport, and they're experiencing this vast emptiness, and it's a challenge for many of them, but I've also seen, again, some creativity that has emerged from our students. And so what we try to remind them is athletics is what they do. It's not the fullness and the wholeness of who they are. And so trying to help them to understand the bigger picture of being citizens, during this pandemic. And so that's the message that, particularly from a faculty athletic perspective, it's a great opportunity for them, quite frankly, to decompress from sport and to put a little bit more attention on their academics. And for many of them, quick, fast, and in a hurry, the decision for what happens for life after sport, it happened. And so we just try to help them to put this in the proper context, to understand that they still can be students, they can still have a happy, healthy, wholesome life, and to recalibrate the role of sport in their overall identity and what they constitute as success.
Yeah, and I'm glad, Dr. Armstrong, that you brought up the issue of mental health, because one of the things I've been thinking a lot about is how can our mental health counselors best support our athletes during this difficult time of transition. And I want to go to Commissioner McWilliams to get your thoughts on that, and also Mr. Frazier.
Yeah, we've been in touch with all of our FARs and our administrators, SWAs, ADs, even our board, our presidents, just making sure that we are addressing and there's contact with our students on our campus and our coaches. I mean, honestly, our student athletes, we know that we have the resources to support what they need. I'm somewhat concerned about our administrators. I mean, as you're talking about, this is our livelihood. This is what we do every day. So you telling me I might not be able to run championships, that's a hard sell when athletics has been the core of who our professions are. And so, as Dr. Armstrong said, we're trying to reinvent ourselves as well and trying to come up with creative ways to still be relevant in this space of college athletics with our students, with our coaches. You know, there's a lot of forums that you see, a lot of conversation on campuses that are doing mental health platforms. I think those are all important. The bigger thing is allowing people to have a space where they can talk and communicate about what they're feeling and understand that what they're feeling is normal because we're all feeling it the same. So I think the platform and understanding what resources are available. Our athletic trainers, we don't talk about a lot, but all of our athletic trainers, I know in our conference and other conferences, they have the most access normally with our student athletes. And they're making daily, if not, you know, weekly connections with these students to make sure and checking in to see how they're doing, because it's not just the mental, they're dealing with the physical part as well. They don't have a place to recover as quickly as they did. Now they're at home and trying to figure out how to work out and how to be mentally and physically strong at this time.
Yeah. Mr. Frazier?
Yeah, you know, it's Dr. Armstrong. She hit a nerve. You know, obviously that that whole identity component is so real, right? So I think that for right now, especially in a population of Black and Brown students that we have, we're starting to see some very interesting components by this online instruction, this virtual instruction. We're starting to see some things that are decreasing in their mental acuity, their ability to function. So some of that data is going to be very interesting on how we move forward if this continues to be the new normal. But I totally agree. I think that what we do now a lot, especially our coaches, is this reconnection. Some of the young people that we have, they're coming from areas in which they've been trying hard to get out of. So the ability now that we thrust them back into some of those environments, and then that they're trying to be able to navigate the academic, the athletic, the social. So this has been, from a mental standpoint, quite significant. So we've teamed up with a number of our clinicians and some of the folks that we currently deal with to continue that conversation, that level of discourse that talks about who are the people in their lives. So they can turn back and have those conversations. So it's not just us, the coaching staff, you know, the athletic trainer, the sports performance professional, myself, my senior staff. That's ongoing. These things can be very debilitating. These things, I mean, this virtual communication, because the time slots line up, and you really don't have the me time component. I'm starting to figure that one out, being home with my beautiful wife and 3 children. I will say this, I totally agree that needs to be the emphasis in our conference, in the MAC. We have a mental health summit every year. We go through, we bring in best practices, but the follow-up is really key in keeping that conversation going, because these things change so drastically and not every individual is the same. So I'll cut it there, but this has been a quite challenge, a big challenge.
Yeah, Dr. Barron, you wanna weigh in?
Yeah, so these are just excellent points, and we realize that having that touch and connectivity becomes incredibly important, and we're seeing lots and lots of examples about classes and groups zooming together so that they can check up on each other as being important. We're rather privileged in that when the Big Ten signed its new media contract, that I actually got a piece off the top, and part of that went to support mental health and to hire a lot more counselors and to have that availability for our athletes. And they moved quickly to, although they can't cross state lines, quickly to making sure that they could have that interaction and help students both online and personal appointments. I think it's just more important than ever, but actually more important for everybody, not just the student athlete. But this is also the now, and we have a transition to what is coming next. And one of the things that I worry about in that transition is that we will see the athlete as someone who's playing football or some other sport for us, and we're making all of these decisions, and it's about them and affecting their health and affecting their identity as a student. And so one of the things that I think is also really important is the degree to which now and in the future that the students are entrained into this decision-making process on how it is that they go forward. And, you know, one of the things that I love about James Franklin as a football coach is he set up this leadership council of his athletes, so that they have a mechanism of communication and feedback and interaction, because it's just as important for them to be a partner in deciding how they can do this in a way that's healthy and that they feel safe, as opposed to have their identity not just be as an athlete, but being there because the university is expecting them to be there, which is often very different than for a lot of other students.
Yeah. And it seems like you're suggesting that there are already models out there that we could easily look to do exactly what you're pointing to.
I think there are a lot of universities that have those types of interactions. I just think the time is there to be much more deliberate about it.
Yeah.
And not, there's so many issues, name, image, and likeness, and other things, where the whole issue there is whether or not actually we're taking advantage of an athlete.
Yeah.
Now, in my mind, this is all part of the university, and I don't think I'm taking advantage of someone, but I sure don't want the athlete to think that. And this is another example where we have to think through this in a way where we're partners, as opposed to us expecting something.
Yeah, no, that's a great piece of advice. Let's move, if we can, to budgetary issues. And Mr. President, I know that this is something that you spend a lot of time, like many of your colleagues around the country, thinking about. What are the short-term, what are the long-term implications? So can you give us some insight of your thinking around budgetary issues as it relates to collegiate sports at this time?
So we're doing every kind of scenario planning that you can imagine. And, certainly we have a real tendency to say, okay, there's basketball and football, and these are our revenue generating sports, and this is what it's all about. And that will drive institutions to think about a reduction in the number of sports, for certain. Most institutions, if they don't have football or basketball revenue, their athletic budgets are in deep straits, and so this will be considerable financial pressure to move forward with those revenue generating sports. I don't think you can do that at the expense of the safety of the athletes, and universities will and colleges will just have to deal with that. I must admit, I am, and I think I'm going back to Ketra's comment about identity. Athletics is not just for image of the university and for alumni. This is us taking the unique gifts of individuals, adding to that an educational opportunity to have these individuals live their gifts and get a great education in the process, because this is another enabler. And so I don't like the idea of limiting the number of students whose gifts can help them on their way to a great college degree and a great future. So I just don't want to reduce the number of sports. We have a lot of them, 31. It keeps us busy. It keeps the athletic director busy. But I think it's really important that we don't look at this purely from the revenue viewpoint, even though we're forced to. Health and safety is important, and we have to remember that the student identity comes first, and these are gifts that students have. I mean, these are truly remarkable individuals, and what we're doing here is creating a path to a higher education degree, and that's what I want to preserve.
Yeah. Mr. Frazier, insights on budgetary challenges that you're seeing or hearing about?
I think Dr. Barron is absolutely correct. The scenarios are just bountiful. It really depends. We're dealing with a lot of uncertainty. We still do not know if fall sports are going to happen. Just like many institutions across the country, the football program drives our revenues on a lot of different indirect and direct ways, not just for the football program, but for all of our programs. And we have 17 programs. And it's interesting to kind of take a look at it right now from a budgetary standpoint. The temptation is going to be extreme to cut. There's no question about that. But I think it's a great time right now to take a look at revenues and expenses as well as the financial model in college athletics. For us, I think I totally agree with President Barron on the opportunities that are there. So I'm really concerned about access and opportunity. I'm one of those folks that would have not gone to college if it wasn't for an athletic scholarship. I'm that percent, right? So for me, it's doesn't matter if it's football, if it doesn't matter if it's gymnastics, it really doesn't matter. But the access component, we're dealing with an enrollment component too, that over 50% of our enrollment are minority students. So for us to take that off the shelf really would change how we look. And again, athletics is a component of the institution. It does not run the university. It needs to be a good partner, a shared agenda. So I think that for me, taking a look at the number of sports, taking a look at quite frankly, the opportunity now of looking at our model. Basically it's a bit of a house of cards model as it relates to, football driving the ship. So we have to be a little bit more deliberate, strategic around other revenue streams, other expenses, and take a look at that, and streamline and make sure that we do not, things don't happen like they're happening right now, where we're really holding our breath to see if one particular sport can fund the model. We do not have Big Ten revenues. I came from University of Wisconsin. I miss those revenues, to be perfect. But it makes you a better administrator. I think at the end of the day, it's about making sure that you fit the needs, the mission values of the institution, and then you take a look at that model and you make sure that you can play within that model. Okay, I think a lot of us, especially at my particular level, the group of 5 level, we've made some expenses and we don't have enough revenues to balance that out. And we have to make sure that we look across the aisle and make sure that we're integrated, fully integrated within the academic mission. So make sure we can look at economies so these things won't happen again. So that's what we've been doing constantly in the great state of Illinois. But I would say that the deletion of sports and the effect of what that could mean financially, as well as holistically within the community, as well as access and opportunity are major components while taking a look at these tight times.
Yeah, and I know that the issue of access and opportunity, Commissioner McWilliams, is something that you're very passionate about as well. But can you weigh in on that and also the budgetary concerns that you have?
Yeah, it's for us. We're Division II. We don't have the same access to resources, to media rights. The conference itself has a media rights agreement that helps raise funding and scholarships for distribution for our member institutions, a very different makeup than most Division II institutions or conferences. We see ourselves as a small piece of the Division I field, but we know that's not where we are. I mean, to have a fund balance has always been a challenge for CIAA. We are hitting all kind of challenges, whether it's House Bill 2 or this, it's always something. But for whatever reason, we've always been truly resilient at our institutions. And I think that's just an HBCU foundation. We've not always had a lot. So we've been able to build upon what we do have and make the best of the resources. I mean, athletics and HBCUs wasn't created for athletics. It was created for our students to have an access point for education. And so that's still maintained, even in the conversation with our board last week. Our students are our priority. We need them for enrollment. We need to give them access. We need them to graduate. And athletics is just the piece of the cake that allows our kids to have a place to go and to use their talent and to get their degree. And so the discussions that we're having about the economics is huge because we need our HBCUs to thrive. They need the funding and the resources of the state within their communities. People need jobs. So it's bigger than athletics for us, probably for everybody. We need a place for people to have a place to go to work. We need our students to have a place to go to school. As Fraser said earlier, now our kids have to choose from being in communities where they can't thrive and not have a place where they can. And we want to be able to provide that place, but you got to have resources to do it. And as a conference, we run a pretty major tournament. And like Sean said, we depend on that tournament to hold all of our championships whole. There hasn't been any discussions to get rid of anything. I think our presidents are, they support athletics. They want to keep everything, but everybody's going to have to make decisions at some point based on priorities. So I'm not going to act like it won't happen. But at this point, we are we are feeling okay to try to maintain and do the best we can with all the options, budget options, you name it. And how do we do it? And to keep your sponsors and the people who support you engaged, your alumni, your fans. I mean, this is the time to be creative. I think we're trying, if we don't have championships at all, CIAA will still show up and there'll still be revenue opportunities. It just might look different.
Yeah. And I think it's important to note, and we've certainly covered it as a publication, the challenges that many HBCUs have faced as a result of COVID-19, that they've really been hit really hard. So I think it's also important to take that into consideration. Dr. Armstrong, did you want to weigh in on any of the budgetary issues that were mentioned?
Absolutely. One of the things that's happening now, so you talk about short-term budget implications and long-term. I think many of the short-term requirements should become long-term. One of the things that this pandemic has required everybody to do is to determine what's essential. And look, I was a former student athlete, coach, administrator. I'm a sport management professor. I've taught sport marketing for eons. And so I get the role of the bells and the whistles and the extravagance and all of those things that have made college athletics this commercial enterprise that it is. I respect that. But I think that our spending in the budget model is so extravagant. There's so many non-essentials that we could really do without. There's a simpler way to deliver, to produce, to experience, and consume sport without the extravagance. Now, we've been required to do that. You've heard the administrators, the president talk about these models. These are the kinds of models that I think we need to go back to be more sustainable. If you're in a situation and you're drowning, or you're in the water and you're in the ocean and you're trying to find something to hold on to, and you find a rock because you're holding on for survival. When you're holding on for survival, you let go of everything that's non-essential. You let go of everything except what you need to hold on to the rock. And that's what we have to do. We got to let go of all those things that are not essential to our survival. And so I like that we've been forced to revisit the collegiate model. And I do think that some of the short-term fixes, in order for them to be sustainable, they have to be a part of the long-term strategic plan as we reimagine, what's possible in this whole landscape of intercollegiate sports.
Yeah, and I like the idea of reimagining, which has come up in some of the other webinars and webcasts that we've held, is this notion that we cannot return necessarily back to the old way in which we kind of done businesses, that we need to rethink new approaches and new ideas moving forward. I want to get to some questions, but before we do that, let me also ask, can you all talk about the impact COVID-19 is having or likely will have on the recruitment and transfer of athletes from community colleges, which I know is an issue. Mr. Frazier, you want to take that?
Yeah, so we have a pretty robust system in our state, and for the most part, we're starting to see a significant uptick to some degree in some of our sports in that recruitment. I think it's going to affect it no matter what. I'll just put that one out. I just think that the way we do things, especially with the new transfer rules and what's currently happening right now, just in NCAA legislation. But I think that overall, the academic, the access piece of it, the affordability, and at my institution, very similar to a number of institutions that look like us, we're struggling with the enrollment piece, right? So that's, that feeder component, that 2-year, that junior college, that ability to have access to a four-year institution is key. So again, we're constantly recruiting, constantly trying to build a better mousetrap relative to our academic programs and our offerings. But again, making sure that we do not compromise standards at all relative to admissibility, the right fit, all of those components. So I think as we can kind of reevaluate this and how the NCAA legislation shakes out, as well as what we look like, because we're all bracing for a minimum of 15 to 20% reduction in enrollment come this fall. I think we all know that. We're not tone deaf about that, but that component, that particular population becomes an opportunity for a lot of us that are constantly going after the traditional high school to college type student to take a look outside and be a little bit more aggressive in these other areas, again, to shore up the line, to reimagine, like Dr. Armstrong is talking about, how do we sustain our institution? I do not look at things from an athletics perspective. My lens is completely institutional. That might be my shared governance background, but I will say that it has to be institutional. At my level, I cannot look at it that I only have, or I only have a $3 million deficit. I only have no, this is us. That's the reimagination that should be going on across the board as it relates to athletics as well as the campus problem.
Yeah. Commissioner McWilliams?
Yeah, I mean, I think, recruiting is always going to be challenging, whether it's Division II, IV, depending on what state you're in. But I do think the challenges with junior colleges are the same. I think our coaches who recruit from junior colleges will have some challenges just recruiting, period. We're in 5 different states. Every state has a different mandate. So that's a problem with itself. So whether you try to recruit a high school student, a junior college, a transfer, I think what's going to be interesting is the number of parents that are going to allow their kids to go back anyways. And will some go to a junior college that's local, or some will go to a 4-year? I mean, those decisions alone, I mean, I look in this, as Sean says, in all my institutions, but I look at it mostly as a parent. What would I let my child do in this day? She's not going back to play anywhere right now, right? But at some point, when will we make decisions for kids? Need us to make decisions for us, for them. Because all of them want to play, but all of them can't play right now. So they're looking for us. When you recruit me to your institution, you're hoping that when you recruited me, I'm hoping that when you recruited me, that you're going to put me in the best position that I can thrive. And so I think that's what we're all looking at, junior college, 4-year transfers, transfer high school. It's all on the same playing field right now. This COVID it's not one institution, it's all of us. That we're all trying to figure out the same strategies of recruiting, financial, will our students come back, state to state mandate? It's a surreal time, I will tell you.
Yeah. Let's go to a audience question. And this one is, will student athletes still receive scholarships if they can't play sports? If not, what type of financial assistance will be provided to them? Anyone wants to take that question?
I believe we're committed to supporting our athletes. We brought them in the door, and then we're not going to change the rules on them.
I would say,
and I haven't heard anything different from sorry, Sean, I hadn't heard anything from the CIAA either, I think, I think all of our presidents want to sustain college athletics, and they want to make sure they make the commitments to the students that they brought them there for. So band is a big piece in our conference too. They're band scholarships. What will happen, to those students as well. So I think across the board, they're trying to preserve all that they can for these students to have access to education.
Yeah, I think that both speakers right on point. We made a commitment to our students, and we will keep our commitment to our students.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that as well, particularly if the end result is supposed to be an education. Taking away sports, even partially or temporarily, should not dissuade their motivation for education. So I think most universities will still honor the support and the resources to provide the student athletes with an opportunity to get an education. Because as one of our panelists mentioned earlier, the sport was just a throughput to get the education, but the end result has always been for them to get a great education. And I think that support will remain.
Yeah. A question for Dr. Armstrong. You mentioned about athletes taking a break from sports and focusing on athletics. However, in our area, students feel the quality of online instruction is sometimes not as good as face-to-face. Can you elaborate on any issues that you're hearing?
Yes, I agree with that questioner. As a professor myself, I'm not an advocate of online unless it's absolutely necessary, which it has been, because I agree that there's such a richness in the face-to-face interaction. But still, even though some of the student athletes are, not having a great experience, I mean, again, that's a part of the resiliency that's required of them. And so I think, again, if we anchor this to education, they have to realize that this is the process that we're in right now. This is our new normal, for now. And so, I remind my students, and I talk to our student athletes, sometimes you don't know how strong or creative you are until being strong and creative is your only option. And so just like I tell them, when the coach tells them that they want to do a different play or they need to learn a different strategy, it takes time for them to warm up to it. It's the same thing in the learning environment. The classroom environment's changed. So I've just encouraged them to be patient, with this ebb and flow, and still try to find a way to maximize the education. And they've been creative. There have been some bumps, but again, these are not unique to student athletes. These are students overall who are having some challenges with, transitioning from residential learning to online learning, because as was mentioned earlier, some of them at home, they're in learning spaces that are not optimal learning environments. So again, we just try to not give them excuses or allow them to make excuses for why they're not succeeding, because I tell them they wouldn't make those excuses if they're on the fields of competition. And so I encourage them to be winners in the classroom, and that means figuring out how to succeed in remote learning.
Yeah. Another question from Abigail Edwards. In regards to the conversation about the disparities in the communities student athletes are currently living in, are there resources to support athletic training or preparation for sports for those who do not have access to a gym? You all know of any?
It's a good question. I think that we've been getting that a lot. Just overall, like the facility, I think Dr. Armstrong said it right. These are tough situations because a lot of the folks that we have, that we've recruited, they're going into certain environments and they would much rather deal with the issues of COVID-19 to go back to their living situation back home. I've had a conversation with parents and guardians and supporters and so forth, and they said it's much safer, Sean, to be in DeKalb, Illinois than going back to X, and I won't disclose the location, what have you. But from a situation of overall resources, we've been doing the best we can with, shipping a certain within the NCAA rules, products for nutrition and access to online instruction and counseling. But it's just not enough. I teach a sports management class. I taught an online class. It's just a different animal overall. The results, it's interesting, as I digress just a tad, we had our highest GPA in the history of the institution this past year. But then we saw some significant drop-offs of our Black and brown population because of the environmental components that were attached to it. So some people are excelling, the highest. But then the other ones we're having casualties because the components around their support center are completely are cut off. So it's going to be really difficult to try to do that within the rules. Again, we're within the NCAA rules on what we can do individual to each individual student to support. So I hope I answered the question as best I can, but it's a tough balancing guide.
Yeah. There truly are a lot of issues there. I mean, Penn State's had a world campus online for a couple of decades, so we felt quite practiced and ready. And we switched over from spring break to Monday. We had 63,000 students in online classes by 10:30 in the morning, and had 98,000 students online total. We had to track down a lot of students that could not connect, did not have the capability to connect, were living in rural areas and could not, providing the equipment, the boosters, sometimes laptops in order to do it. We got it down to about to less than 1% of the student population that didn't get to the end of the semester. They also had good grade points, but we had to spend a lot of personal touch time of what's going on, why are you not doing there, a lot of things to try to make people be comfortable. We gave the students a grade, but they had the choice to switch it to pass-fail if they wanted to, because we were trying to de-stress the environment. We had to de-stress it for the faculty too, who started to think about course evaluations and how we were doing it. We discovered that synchronous classes, so a class could see each other, worked much better than everybody on their own. This is a real challenge for a lot of people to not actually be in that classroom setting. So many different factors here that we have to think through in terms of doing it. And we've mentioned the training, but one of the things that we've noticed is the number of students who literally could eat their families out of house and home because they're athletes and the demand is there. And normally this is one of the things that we do as part of the providing for part of the cost of the education. So we switched to go back to assist people in that category. There's a lot to think about here for how this affects different populations, how this affects people who have economic challenges and the training and other things. And it's going to the gym is not the same as that supervised training that from our pros, that this is their business. So many different issues to deal with. And I believe that in a lot of cases, back supervised training table is healthier for many of these students.
Yeah. Here's a question. To what degree do you think Board of Trustees at institutions will be tempted to use athletics and the revenue to dictate return to campus decisions for entire student bodies? And how do presidents and senior leaders temper those tendencies? I don't know if you want to take that one, Dr. Barron.
Well, so I will tell you that trustees are human, and almost all of mine are my alumni, and they live and breathe based on all those good things about Penn State athletics. And I said they're human because they're going to hear from an awful lot of people. And I'm quite used to, as a president, that a coach gets a good raise, and it's what most people would say a remarkable salary, and I get email that says you're not paying this person enough. And I get a bonus for raising $100 million, and people are saying, well, isn't that just part of your job? Why did you, so I'm quite used to the fact that in this wonderful marketplace of ours, sports is incredibly important, and the trustees are just going to hear about it, and they're going to be saying, are we? And so my view on these things is that universities have well thought out plans and moments that we're making decisions and we're basing them on health expertise. So I have a very deliberate set of teams, one on health and safety that is guiding a back to work group and a back to campuses and community group. And even though we have a lot of pressure to do things, I just really work at being persistent and consistent about saying, here's our path, we're going to get there, but we're going to get there in a way you can be proud of us. And so far I've had the full support of my board, but they have a lot of interest in what happens to athletics. There's just no two ways about it. And so do my alumni.
Others want to chime in?
I would say, similar. I mean, you could be reactive or you could be responsive, right? And the responsive way is to have the facts and the figures for my board. They're going to have to go back to their boards and trustees and give them information, but they're depending on me. Similar to Dr. Barron, we have teams in our office. We've got the governance team. You got to figure out practice and playing season and figure out what that looks like. If it's short, extended, canceled. We've got our business and finance. You got to tell me what our sponsors and marketing looks like, what losses there are, our PR, marketing, our champion. Everybody has a component, and we all connect as often as we do weekly so that I'm informed and know how to put that together to inform my board. Because ultimately they're going to make the decision, but they're depending on me to give them the information so they can make an informed decision. And what we agreed on, despite what everybody else in the world is doing, every conference and institution is doing something different, we're going to have to make the best decision for the CIAA and what's in the best interest of our students and communities that we serve. Yeah. It's tough, but at the end of the day, whatever we decide, like Dr. Barron said, we know that we did all that we could, and that decision was the best decision. It's no win or losses here. Whatever we decide will be the win.
You know, if I could add, I think one of the other unique outcomes of this pandemic, it has really elevated our understanding of the role of sport in the fibers of the fabric of this culture. I mean, and so it has reminded us, you know, to understand the need to recalibrate that in some capacity. I'm hearing conversations about people who are willing to take a chance without testing, without vaccines, because they love Michigan football. And I love Michigan football as well, but I'm not sure if it's worth losing a life. And so what's interesting, you talk about the board and the other perceptions, the manner in which sport is just so entrenched in what society considers normal, it has added a whole level of additional pressures. And so it has required all of us to really, you know, make these decisions thoughtful. But I really love what, you know, Jackie was saying earlier. It has reminded us of what our values and principles should be. And so I think we're going to see that come out of this pandemic, where we put our priorities, where our values are. You know, there's a Native American proverb that says, I can't hear what you're saying because your actions speak so loudly. So I think it's going to be interesting to see the actions of all of these sport entities, because that's going to speak a lot about the true values.
Yeah, well said. So next question, is there a competitive disadvantage with some states relaxing the stay-at-home rules and allowing teams and schools to have workouts with those in states with restrictions that cannot?
I can deal with that with my coaches on a regular basis.
It's already competitive. We got people going to the beaches and some people who can't. We got people there and people we can't, right?
Yeah. I would say that, you know, I think that's like the political football right now, that's all over the place. And, you know, there is some level of competitiveness, but to what degree? You know, back to Dr. Armstrong, you know, people's lives, you know, I shudder to turn the TV on, excuse me, with some of these images of people just doing what they want to do when they want to do it, with total disregard to some of the health and safety issues. I don't want to be holier than thou when it comes to some of this conversation, but you know, we have a pandemic. People are dying. You know, I think the part of me that strikes me that's being completely not thought about is that this is a critical time. This is DEFCON 5 in our overall leadership component. We have to show some levels of leadership. Some people are just not going to follow some of these things, right? They're just not going to do it, regardless of who they are. But the overall arching issues around the pandemic and COVID-19 is that when people catch this virus, some people die from this, and we do not have a vaccine. So again, being consistent with that messaging, not to scare anybody, I think we all know that. We've seen a significant amount of controllable items around how to manage the curve, how to manage the situation by practicing social distancing and all the other things that the medical clinicians are telling us to do. But at the end of the day, people have a problem with this because they'll take the risk to do what they need to do to experience North American culture's highest affinity, which is sport, right? So the answer to your question is, yeah, when I say that to the coaches, well, that's nice. Once we have the clinicians and the doctors to tell us that we're safe, we will have competitive advantage too.
Yeah.
That's what we will have. But right now, we don't. And this is what we have to follow. So I think that's where we have to manage expectations. Our leaders have to be our leaders from the top down to understand that these are the things that we have to do. And I get what's happening in so-and-so state. I'm really concerned about that. But right now, I'm worried about making sure we do things here. And we need to hold the line about that. And we can't flinch.
Yeah.
I have a mentor who used to tell me all that. He said, do not flinch, Mr. Frazier. And this is where we have to be. We have to be able to hold the line. And if we do that, we'll come through this and we will have competitive advantage here as well. So that's my perspective.
Commissioner McWilliams?
Yeah, you know, I was thinking, like, I don't want to be in a competitive disadvantage, right? I want my students to thrive when they get on the field. I don't want to have them to worry about if somebody breathes on them. I don't want my trainers to have to worry about if they have enough of this or enough of that. I don't want to have to worry about that somebody contacted it and then somebody died and then it becomes a legal ramification. Like, there's just so many components to it. And at the end of the day, these are our kids. Would you put your own kid out there right now? Absolutely not. I'm not even going anywhere. So I think we have to look at our students and our kids as if they were ours. And when we're ready to put them out there, that we know that we can protect them at every best interest that we can, period. And right now, I just don't think we're in a position, and I don't want to make decision today. I think we have a little bit of time, though it makes everything around us makes us feel like we have no time. And I don't agree with that. I think there is time. I think we just have to make some adjustments with scheduling and you name it. It just may look different, not what we're used to.
No. Well, let's talk about that, because a number of questions is about the timeline and when do you think a decision will be made for the fall? We're almost in June now. What say you? I mean, what do you think? I know Commissioner McWilliams, you said we have time, but when do you think realistically,
Yeah, so our board, we're going to reconvene. We just had our meeting last week. We decided not to make any decisions. We know what's going on. We have some homework to do in our office, again, all these different scenarios. We're going to reconvene in the next couple of weeks by the end of June. Some of our decisions have to be made because of contracts and agreements with our tournament and with our football site and all that other stuff. So we're aware that we're going to have to make some decisions, but I think what we want to be able to provide is what are the alternatives to the decision that we make, and is it extending the season a little further down? Is it doing everything virtually for the experience of the fan and not necessarily for the players, but they're still engaged, but not on the field? I mean, those are the things that we're talking about. Don't know what it's going to look like, but I know I got a team that's working on it. But I think we have to think differently about what this looks like. We could go potentially a whole year without sports. That makes my stomach turn, right? But at the end of the day, there's a possibility that people will make decisions, schools will make decisions that they're going to defer another semester, not just one, maybe two, because of the safety. So there's a lot to think about, but we're giving ourselves another couple of weeks to come up with the first set of decisions that we'll make regarding this fall and then even possibly our tournament, but nothing at this point.
Dr. Barron, what's your timetable like?
So, it's not just sort of COVID safety, it's also being physically conditioned to be able to play safely. And so that is an issue. And we're watching the other conferences that are in our leagues. And so we're watching them begin now to bring athletes back to do the conditioning. The Big Ten is looking at this as post June 1, and then schools have to make a decision based on what's going on in their state and in their particular region. So we will start to do that in anticipation, because you need in excess of 60 days lead time in order to make sure that athletes are ready. So already there is one decision being made, and that's preparatory to be able to play. That does not tell you what will happen. I happen to think it's when, not if, and that there's a cascade of issues even there, and in terms of spectators or not spectators, and what we can do to keep athletes safe. And so conference having their rules and being able to do the same type, perhaps at a higher level because of contact sport, in testing and tracing to make sure that we have people safe. So I believe there will be play. I'm probably more worried about how stadiums will look than I am about whether or not there'll be some competition on the field of play.
Mr. Frazier?
Yeah, I would agree. I think that we're all in this fluid, uncertainty. And I think in the next 3, 4 weeks, we're going to have that decision. There's contracts, there's return to play guidelines. We have a conference return to play. We've got a unit return to play, and I have an institutional. We're all working in alignment, right, to see what the best course of action But it kind of goes back to making sure that we don't compromise the health and safety. I have to go back to that because people want to just throw that out and make it more of a political situation than to deal with the reality of it. Going back to the health and safety of this. Once we have that under control, go back to Jackie's point. I have a senior that's getting ready to go, a high school senior that's getting ready to go to New England to go to college, and she's not going to college if I don't feel comfortable at the end of the day that her safety is not compromised. That's just the way it is, from a parental standpoint. And I'm treating the students and the student athletes that I serve in that capacity, and so is my president. And I think that piece of it needs to be talked about first. I think the ramifications the next 2 or 3 weeks are going to be defining for us to make some level of decision, both at the conference as well as institutional level. But again, taking our time, getting it right. So therefore, when we're in a modified fall or no fall or whatever the deal is, or how draconian it might be, we made the right decision protecting health and safety.
Dr. Armstrong, I imagine you're a part of a lot of these discussions as well.
Yes, and I don't really have a lot additional to add, but I just want to echo that I think it's important to, rest in reason. I mean, sometimes we're so quick to make, I've seen entities make quick responses because it's emotional, because we love this thing, it's been taken away, let me make it right, let me fix it now. And so I do think that it's important that there's pause, there's time to rest and reason and understanding what the implications are. I would imagine that, we're 3 or 4 weeks or so away from having a better idea, but it is important not to just rush into it to make it because sport is emotional. We're all attached, we all love it, and we feel like part of our lives is missing. And so there's a tendency to make these emotional decisions. And I'm just glad that enough people are pausing to say, let's get some rest, let's rest and reason in this process and then make a decision. But I would think, and answer your question about the timeline, it seems to be 3 or 4 weeks away from having to know something so that people can plan accordingly.
Yeah. Question for Mr. Frazier. What does it mean and look like to be a, quote, athletics diversity and inclusion designee for my campus?
I missed that last part. To be a little glitch. I'm sorry.
Yeah, what does it mean to be an athletics diversity and inclusion designee for my campus?
It's an interesting question. It definitely means that from a representation standpoint, you're doing everything you can to advocate, to push forward, to make sure you're throwing the rope back over the proverbial fence of helping, again, in that area of access and opportunity. From an overall advocate for this, obviously, these issues are significant, and we will have the temptation, okay, I've used that word, to say that maybe this could be pushed to the side, maybe, on some of our campuses, because we're dealing with the health and safety component. That's what rises up, number one. But diversity and inclusion is the fabric of, right? It is part of the norm. It shouldn't be an auxiliary, an extra component of it that we're adding in. It should be a part of the mainstream. So we need to continue that. We see that in our community right now. We've got some upheaval, some of all the things that are happening in Minnesota, what has happened across our nation. Race or diversity and inclusion has a very complex history in America, specifically. In the world, but in America, right? So understanding the access and opportunities components of that, and understanding and being educated, not necessarily for the minority, but for the majority, to understand and educate folks. The necessity to have these skill sets and to be able to advocate is essential. Yeah. And it's something that we need to train ourselves and our colleagues on a daily basis to understand. So that's the best way that I could put it.
No, and I know that you and I have talked about this issue over the years, and is really passionate for you and Dr. Barron as well. Last time you visited us, talked about, again, inclusion excellence and the importance of that as well. So really glad to hear you all weigh in on that issue. We are out of time, but this was really a fascinating conversation, and it went by too quickly. I learned a lot and certainly appreciate all of your insights. And we will continue to engage in this dialogue with many of you over the next couple of months. So again, thank you for your time and your expertise. It was really a treat for me. And I'm going to turn it back over to Sine for final comments.
Yes, thanks so much for joining us today. You can view past Diverse Talk Live webcasts on our website. Again, please join us tomorrow from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for the virtual 2020 Arthur Ashe Jr. Sports Scholars Award Ceremony. Help us celebrate these amazing student athletes. Go to diverseeducation.com for viewing instructions. And to stay abreast of the latest diversity and inclusion news in higher education, sign up for our newsletters and subscribe to our magazine, including the DigiMag at diverseeducation.com.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
you.
you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
All take care.
Take care. So long.